unfortunately, right now, we're seeing tremendous public loss of confidence with some justification in the Department of Justice. And that needs to be remedied.
Our nation, our republic is under attack. It is not under attack by foreign adversaries in a sense. It is under attack and being seized by corrupt institutions, these bureaucracies that are being run by these radical leftists, as well as establishment on the Republican side that have targeted not just President Trump, but the American people and, I believe, our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. This has been going on for some time now, folks. I have been so extraordinarily frustrated by what has happened in our country, by the failure of our Department of Justice to do its job, by the failure of our intelligence apparatus at the highest levels that have targeted President Trump so openly that it is embarrassing and is shameful that the career that I had as an investigative journalist all those years, working for newspapers, that the top news agencies in the United States of America, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all failed miserably to hold our government accountable because they were playing right into the government's hands. It is so shameful that our intelligence apparatus and those that joined our intelligence apparatus to send a letter, basically signed off, telling the American people that Hunter Biden's laptop, that his laptop was Russian disinformation when it contained some of the most incriminating evidence against President Biden and his family that should have been readily available for the American people so that they can make the right decision at the ballot box. It is shameful and embarrassing, and they walk around without even a shame in the world. And I'm talking about the people that are running these news agencies, and I'm talking about our bureaucracies and our Department of Justice, which I was always it's not perfect. I get that. But I was always proud, right? I am proud of our nation. I'm proud of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. I'm proud that my mother was an immigrant from Cuba and that she came here looking for freedom on the Johnson Freedom flights and she found it. And that my mom was never ashamed that she had to take a job at a factory or clean, an old folks' home or go to the Goodwill to find a pair of shoes just to give me a better life, because that was the American dream. Because working hard and being free is better than being locked up in a mansion, right? And having no freedom at all. But it is so shameful what is happening to President Trump. All of the institutions, these lawyers, these district attorneys, Alvin Bragg in New York, the DA there, Fani Willis, in Georgia, the court trial in Florida, the one in Washington, D.C. It's a shame that they have politicized the system so much that the lawfare is so vicious that it's willing, this system, this swamp, this bureaucracy, that it's willing to trample everything our nation has stood for and stands for, and we are slowly, and if not already there, becoming a banana republic. I do not care how you feel about President Trump. Personal feelings should not be involved here. What matters here is the law. What matters here is the truth. What matters here is the foundation of our nation. That is all that matters here. And upholding that law. And before I get to our next guest, who is extraordinary, David Schoen should be President Trump's attorney in these cases. He represented President Trump during his second impeachment. David Schoen is phenomenal. He is a very good friend of mine. And he is somebody that I absolutely believe in. And he's smart and he understands the law and he defends like no other. He is a criminal defense attorney like no other. I would say he's probably one of the best in the nation, if not the best in the nation. I personally consider him the best. But I want to take you back just a little bit before we get to David Schoen, and he is going to go into details and he's going to give you exclusive access and an exclusive look at all of the indictments against President Trump and what needs to be done in order to defend him and defend our nation, because they go hand in hand. This is a battle of all battles. And it reminds me so much of in the very beginning in 2016, when the swamp creatures were targeting the president, targeting Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, targeting anybody around the president. We knew it was just the beginning. We knew it was just the beginning. And so many of us have forgotten about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and also the unmasking of people around the president. Remember that? I know it's been a long time, hasn't it? You and I sat through all of that together every single night, unraveling another piece, like Sean used to say, the layers of an onion. And I remember John Solomon and I breaking news all the time about the FBI and other intelligence agencies that were conducting counterintelligence probe into Russia's efforts to influence the election and curry favor with U.S. figures. Remember that? When we busted that story wide open, when we started to break apart every piece of that story, every layer of that onion, and we exposed how people within the United States government, people like John Brennan, head of the CIA, James Comey, head of the FBI, Andy McCabe, the second in command at the FBI, James Clapper, all of these senior officials were targeting Trump at the behest of Hillary Clinton and the DNC and Mark Elias and all of their lies and the money that was funneled through their private attorneys all the way to Fusion GPS. And then that money was going to pay a British spy who put together a dossier based on Igor Danchenko's lies about the president. You know who was cooperating with Russia? The left was cooperating with Russia. The left. They bought Russia's lies, or they knew they were lies, and we know they knew. And then they sold it as a bill of goods to the American public. So much so that even when the Washington Post or the New York Times says, mea culpa, we were wrong about Russiagate, like in a small little paragraph buried inside their newspaper, nobody knows, nobody cares. Those on the left still believe it. They believe the lie. That is why I have David Schoen on the show today. I want you to understand that he is one of the best attorneys in the United States to explain these 4 major indictments and 4 major cases against President Trump. These 4 major cases against President Trump, unwarranted cases that are purely election interference, that are being used as a weapon to interfere in the upcoming 2024 presidential election. So no matter who you want to be president, if it's Ron DeSantis, if it's Nikki Haley, if it's Vivek Ramaswamy, whoever it is, even if it's President Donald Trump, you need to fight hard. Tell your lawmakers that it's unacceptable, that this election interference should not be allowed, because this is about you. And it doesn't stop with President Trump. I promise you that. This will not end with President Trump. This will set a banana republic precedence for future elections and will taint the United States and our rule of law and will fundamentally fracture our country irreparably. That I do absolutely believe. I'll be back in a moment with David Schoen, but first, Allegiance Gold. Allegiance Gold. Gold and silver allow you to protect what you've worked so hard for. And it gives you back, by the way, the control and the privacy that you need. And what do I tell you all the time in this woke, crazy world? Diversify, diversify, diversify. Do not put all your financial eggs in one basket. And you can do that with Allegiance Gold. Right now, they'll give you $5,000 for Sarah Carter listeners, a free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sarah sent you. My friends at Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA, your 401k with physical gold and silver. They can have it delivered securely right to your front door. Get $5,000 now of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sarah sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today, 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, or go to protectwithsarah.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but we can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, or go to protectwithsarah.com. I am so happy to have you on the show, David. David Schoen, a constitutional scholar and trial and appellate lawyer with over 35 years of experience. And like I was saying, David, anytime if I ever have any need for anybody in a lawyer or representation in the future, anything happens to me, I hope it's you. He is by far the best defense lawyer criminal defense lawyer in the entire country. So my first question, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's start out that way.
Thank you very much for having me. I love seeing you and talking to you any opportunity I get.
Yeah, me too, David. It's been too long. And so the first question I have is, why aren't you right now? You don't have to answer it, but I would love to see you representing President Trump right now. I know you have in the past. Maybe you can't talk about it right now, but I would love to see you in that position as a defense lawyer for the president right now.
Yeah. Laura Ingraham made that comment the other night on the television also. I very much appreciate it. But it was an honor to represent him in the impeachment trial. That was really an extraordinary experience. I certainly have kept in touch with him. We have a great relationship. I'm always honored to talk to him and to represent him. I saw him not long ago. I think that I can't really go into the details, but, we've certainly considered it with each of the cases that has come up. But I have a hard and firm rule that I will only take on a representation if I can put my own team in. And, he has a couple people in place already. So far, it hasn't really worked out, but we'll see what the future brings.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that opportunity, right? There's always that opportunity. And President Trump is somebody who has, and I have been told, a lot of respect for you and your knowledge and your capabilities. So it's just out there. I had to ask the question. I would be remiss if I didn't ask those tough questions, David. But I think like what we're seeing right now surely looks to me, and I'm talking about what I have seen as far as I believe is the politicization, I guess is the word, or the weaponization or lawfare against the president right now. It clearly feels like election interference to me. These 4 cases against President Trump are astonishing. I don't know if you feel that way.
Yeah, unless you believe in extraordinary coincidences, the idea that now, 2.5 years after the fact, each of these jurisdictions decided to bring an action now to tie up President Trump during the election season, then I think, yes, it's a fair analysis to say this is the complete weaponization of our criminal justice system, completely a partisan political agenda running this part of the system. I think it's a disgrace. I've never seen anything like it. I hope we never see anything like it again. One common factor I think you've seen in all of these attempts to go after President Trump is just having it run by people who are just unabashedly Trump haters, whether it's the special counsel now or Ms. Willis in Georgia, who's running for election, or the district attorney in New York, Alvin Bragg, who ran on a platform of being the first to convict President Trump before he was even under investigation, or going back to the Mueller Commission. Only put people on the commission, as you reported, as well as anybody in the country, or better at the time, was only populated by people who were unabashed Trump haters. The country cannot believe in the results of any so-called investigation when it's skewed from the start. The January 6th committee is just another example. They put as the chair of that committee, Chairman Thompson, who just beforehand was suing President Trump personally, claiming Trump was responsible for all the events of January 6th and that he, Thompson, had been personally injured. They then Pelosi named him to be the head of a committee supposedly investigating those events. It's an absolute outrage. It's completely un-American.
How is it that, and you're a Democrat. You're a Democrat. I mean, but how is it that the left has been able to garner such power and capability, as well as with those that hate Trump on the right? I mean, the establishment, I don't want to put it in any one political party because there are many people on the right to target President Trump this way. I think this is what the American people just can't fathom. Has our system become so corrupted that the bureaucracy itself is able to work against a duly elected president or somebody that is intending to run for office who isn't accepted by the establishment? It feels as though the establishment has become its own machine, its own powerhouse. And that feels like an enormous David and Goliath story. I mean, how do you confront that machine?
Right, well, the answer is yes. It does reflect that kind of corruption, I believe. It's also aided by a lot in the mainstream media who don't question things on one side, meaning the Biden side, right, and who come to conclusions without evidence on the other side, who find people guilty in the press before they've even been charged, who throw the presumption of innocence out the window, all of that. I'd back up one step. I wouldn't say I'm a Democrat. I certainly don't want to be associated with the current status of the Democratic Party and the hate squad that seems to be manipulating and running it and who they kowtow to. I have represented the Democratic Party as recently as last year. I represented a socialist candidate for president in 2020, but I really am most interested in the issues. I also represent the Libertarian Party, so I don't have a position politically. But anyway, how do you fight all of this stuff? I think you have to take the cases one by one. Unfortunately, that's not as easy as it should be because we're seeing, again, for one of the first times ever in my experience, a number of judges involved in the process who also seem to have political agendas. I've never really seen this from the federal bench before, but we see a series of judges in the United States District Court in D.C. who have made extraneous comments about President Trump having nothing to do with the matter before them in cases into which he's not a party. They're absolutely extraordinary and outrageous, and I think it should disqualify them from sitting on any case into which he's a party.
Well, let's talk about that. What about Judge Tanya Chutkan, appointed by Obama, was confirmed in the Senate in 2014. I got the bona fides right here. Trump has questioned her ability to be unbiased. I mean, she certainly has it out for President Trump. So what about that?
And yet his lawyers failed to file so far a motion for recusal. I suggested it early on in the case from the first step, because if you wait till later, you're going to get the accusation that you're only now moving to recuse her because of rulings you don't like in the case. And rulings she makes in the case cannot be a basis for recusal. I think the number one factor about Judge Chutkan, first of all, I have another case with her. She's been very fair in the other case, but I have to laugh when I hear her talking about needing to move this case along. I've had motions to dismiss in that case pending for a number of years already without a decision. But put that aside for a second. I think the number one disqualifying factor for her is that in sentencing one of the January 6th defendants, she made the absolute statement that she knew that that person wasn't acting on his own agenda, but that he was acting for President Trump in what he did. That's a determination about facts that are in the case before her now. She absolutely ought to be disqualified for a minimum, the appearance of a lack of impartiality, and the case should go to another judge. But they haven't made that motion.
Why not? Has anyone explained why they haven't done that?
Absolutely not. They, they unfortunately, I'm not happy with the way in which these lawyers have been reactive and not proactive in each of the cases, quite frankly. You saw there was a dispute about this protective order in the D.C. case. That is an order limiting what President Trump can say about the case, among other things. Well, one of the same lawyers, Mr. Blanche, had agreed to the protective order, almost the same language in the Florida case, the non-classified protective order. So it's a little tough to come back in this case and say, oh, no, we need the right to be able to speak about the case. That's one thing. But, maybe they thought they got some mileage in that. I know on television, Mr. Lauro held it out as if it were a win. That wasn't a win. They didn't win on the protective order case. In fact, the government got to expand what's considered to be sensitive materials under the order. So, no, I don't know why they haven't moved to recuse her there. I don't know why they didn't move immediately, have it ready to go in Georgia to remove the case to federal court. Instead, they're beyond the 8 ball now because Mr. Meadows has gone first and a number of others are going, and they're going to control the dialogue right now. And I don't like that.
I was very curious about that because, yes, Mark Meadows, who was working as his chief of staff, now is the first. And they're moving to either get it out of Georgia, right, into the federal, or dismiss it altogether, right, to dismiss his case altogether, or move it out of the state and move it to a federal court. And that to me is very interesting because you said he is now going to kind of control the tenor. His lawyers are, not the president's lawyers. And that's another issue that I have. So tell me a little bit about that case. Tell me a little bit. I see DA Fani Willis as somebody who's looking to make a name for herself. I was in Georgia. I was talking to folks on the ground there. Obviously, in Georgia, there's a lot of Democrats in Fulton County. So I got their side of things. But it also appears that DA Fani Willis likes to use racketeering charges. She is definitely famous for that there. And sometimes those cases can stay pending for a very long time. And they also cost a lot of money. They also cost the defendant a lot of money and a lot of time. So can you explain a little bit so that the audience understands what that means as far as like when it comes to the president?
Sure. And let's point out that, Ms. Willis is also running for re-election. So I don't think that's coincidental either. No. And I think she thinks her constituency in Fulton County supports this kind of case, the constituency that voted overwhelmingly against President Trump in the last election. So you're right. She likes to bring these RICO, racketeering charges. The Georgia statute is very broad, and it's much more open to abuse than even the federal statute. That is, for example, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but one difference is it doesn't require what they call short or long-term continuity. In the federal statute, you have to show, in order to bring it as a racketeering case, you have to show that this so-called enterprise either operated in the past for a long period of time, or even if it's been in existence for a short period of time, it risks continuing in the future. She couldn't win either of those in this case, but under her statute, she doesn't have to. I think she abuses the statute. I think one of the main reasons to remove this case to federal court would be to expand the jury pool. You take it outside of Fulton County, and I think it's going to be very difficult to find 12 jurors among Georgians who will believe that what went on here was a criminal enterprise. I think that's the most outrageous abuse of the statute now. So listen, Meadows is going forward with it. His lawyer, Mr. Terwilliger, is not exactly what I would call a team player, but he's a very experienced former Department of Justice lawyer. He's a bright guy. But he already in his papers tried to distinguish his case from President Trump's case by saying, well, he doesn't have a federal indictment going against him. There's no allegation that what he did was that he committed any federal crime and all that. That's really neither here nor there, quite frankly. This is a classic case that should be removed to federal court under all circumstances. There's a recent case, 2022. A friend of mine actually brought, who's one of the lawyers in this case now for another defendant. He's probably the best lawyer in the case. Anyway, it's a case called Georgia versus Hines that lays it out. Why we have this removal statute, why when a federal officer is acting under color of federal law, it's appropriate for the federal courts to hear it, not a localized court that could drag him in him or her in any time. In this case, President Trump only made the call and only got his call received because he was acting as president of the United States, who truly believed, based on the advice he had been given and data he had seen, that there were election irregularities. He made the phone call with lawyers on the phone with him. That's right, the call that she bases everything on and that they only play snippets from in the press. This is a call, if you listen to the whole call in context, it's clear that he and everyone on the call believed that there were irregularities that they wanted investigated. When they say find these votes, he believed and he was told that there were votes that were improperly cast, there were votes that were missing, and all of that. And he only spoke about the margin between them. That's why that number came up.
Right. Well, I want to remind everyone, David, I want to remind everyone that this call was the call that President Trump made, right, with Brad Rapp, and I'm going to pronounce his name incorrectly, I know it, but Raffensperger, is that correct? Raffensperger.
Close enough.
You know what? I'm never going to get that name right. You guys are going to laugh. Brad, yeah, with the Secretary of State. And that was the call. It wasn't like he was speaking to him in secret, like he wanted to get these. He was just questioning what was going on with these 12,000 votes, right? He had lost the state by less than 12,000 votes. And President Trump was basically making the case that he could still show that he could win the case. He could win that state if they could just go back and go over those votes again, because it was so few. Is that a crime? You can't make a phone call like that anymore? But that's her whole case. You better be able to.
That's right. Not only better you be able to, what I say is he had an obligation to. If he believed genuinely, as he did, and I can tell you today, he believes inside and out, heart and soul, that the election was stolen from him and there were irregularities. However people come down on that, that's his belief, and that's directly relevant to the criminal charges against him and the state of mind that's required. But he certainly believed it on that call, as did all of the other people on that call, including lawyers and staff members. And there were a number of them on the call. So I say not only wasn't it a crime, he was obligated to. If he believed that, and he's serving as president of the United States, Article 2, Section 1 and Section 3 of our Constitution require the president to take care that the laws of our country are faithfully executed. That's what he had to do. I'm going to tell you something.
But instead, they criminalized him. And they didn't do that with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton has said since 2016 that the election was stolen and that the Russians gave President Trump the election. She has said that even though we have ample proof and overwhelming evidence, some of which I wrote about along with John Solomon and you, and we were always on TV at that time with Sean Hannity talking about the case in 2016, where we know for a fact that the Democrats paid a foreign agent to come up with a dodgy dossier that was filled with lies about him stealing the election. So how is it that President Trump is being charged and she never was charged with anything? And by the way, everybody who ran our intelligence agencies, from the CIA to the DNI with Clapper to the FBI with Comey and John Brennan, all of them appeared to know that it was all lies and still interfered in that election and in that presidency. How is it that nobody else is being charged?
It's really unbelievable. I'm sure your listeners and viewers know your bona fides, but I'm going to say probably nobody out there reporting on this stuff knows the intelligence community better than you. You reported on it back then. You're 100% right. Not just Hillary to be charged. It's, Mark Elias, all of these people who were involved in that campaign. Right. It's just it's unbelievable, really. But, even putting that behind us, all of the people who in the past have said elections were stolen. Stacey Abrams, there's a senator who said, appearing beside Stacey Abrams, the only way Stacey Abrams could have lost this election for governor in Georgia is if the election were stolen. But now all of a sudden, if you say that, that sounds like a crime to even suggest it. That can't be the way we operate. It's a sad state of affairs.
Let me ask you this. How terrifying is it? And people have asked me this, just regular folks. David, I'm in the country. It's like, should we be careful? They say, Sarah, Can we talk on the phone now about anything? Can we say that we think the election was stolen without, the FBI thinking we're part of some domestic extremist group, or, parents going to, their school board meeting and saying, we don't want our children reading this junk in kindergarten. All of a sudden, they get targeted by the FBI. You represent people in civil rights cases. You have stood up before and for the Constitution of the United States. Have you ever, or did you ever imagine that it would get this bad? And how concerned should we be that our law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and our intelligence agencies, along with, it appears, very powerful political elites, are using these tools against the American people and against a duly elected president, former president, but he was duly elected.
This is some of the most egregious fallout that I think we've seen. This is why our First Amendment is, fundamental to the securing of all of the other rights in the Constitution, quite frankly. Yes, the effect of this has been to chill people's right to free speech. Whether their response is rational or not, it's understandable that the average American person would think that he or she runs some risk in just talking about certain issues that are issues of some of the greatest public interest right now. It's very sad. You're ostracized if you're not criminalized. It's a very dangerous situation. I don't know that we've seen this for decades.
Allegiance Gold. I just told you earlier, gold and silver allow you to protect what you've worked so hard for. So diversify, diversify, diversify. And right now you can get $5,000 of free silver. Again, $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA. Or go to protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks. We already know that, but we can prepare. Go to 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, no H. Or go to protectwithsara.com. I want to go through really quickly because I'm so happy to have you on the show. These different charges against President Trump, the various indictments. And I want you to just hit on really quickly. I mean, the prosecution, we've got Jack Smith, right? Special counsel. Trump's legal team right now is, I believe, Evan Corcoran and John Lauro. Is that correct? I'm imagining that.
Well, Evan Corcoran's kind of on the outside, but the lawyers who've made an appearance are John Lauro and Todd Blanche in the D.C. case, and in the Florida case that the special counsel brought, Todd Blanche and a guy named Mr. Keiss, former Solicitor General in Florida.
Well, let's start with Florida. Let's start with Florida first. Let's talk a little bit about the case. What are you seeing there? What can you point out to all, for all of you out there that are listening? This will be it. I mean, you will not hear a better legal analysis than what David Schoen is going to tell you right now. I guarantee it. I guarantee you that probably President Trump is listening to this as well. What did you see in the Florida case?
The Florida case, I think, is outrageous for the degree to which it's criminalized a practice which we know without any question other former presidents have engaged in. I mean, there is a special counsel, so-called, right now investigating Joe Biden for his taking of documents that when we must assume contain what they call national defense information. And Joe Biden, as a guy who's been in government his entire life, certainly should have known better if it were inappropriate, rather than Donald Trump, a businessman. But anyway, Hillary Clinton, you reported extensively on the documents she had and were destroyed in her hard drive and so on. So I think the criminalization of this thing is outrageous. They now want to couch it in obstruction terms to get a higher exposure to prison sentence. But I think if I were to point out sort of hot button issues in this case, you're going to see a tension between the Presidential Records Act and what President Trump understood to be his right to determine whether any document that came across his desk was a personal document or property of the office. There's a case from one of his real nemesis in D.C., Judge Amy Berman Jackson, that said virtually carte blanche for the president to determine whether documents are personal or official documents. that's part of it. Again, I don't believe he thought ever he was doing anything wrong. These tapes don't prove otherwise to me. But I think one of the hot button issues in that case is going to be the Corcoran notes. Evan Corcoran, who was assigned the job of going through the documents down there and reporting on them, kept detailed notes for some reason of his interaction with President Trump. A judge in D.C., former Chief Judge Beryl Howell, ordered that Corcoran's notes be turned over based on a crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. I think it was outrageous. He never got to review the redactions she intended to make. Those notes were brought to the grand jury, apparently. I think that tainted the entire process. I think one of the most important motions in that case is to dismiss that case based on the taint from the Corcoran notes and the violation of attorney-client privilege. So that's the Florida case to me.
That is fascinating. And by the way, under the Obama administration, they had expanded the ability to actually, I would say, spy on attorney-client between a religious leader and a patron of a church or of a synagogue. This was exposed actually in the FISA courts, and how the Obama administration had done that. So it doesn't surprise me that they would wield this kind of power with especially how weaponized the bureaucracy has been. And unfortunately, lawfare has become just as weaponized. So, I mean, this is very fascinating. What about the case let's go to DC. Let's just go back to the DC case. What do you see there?
Well, the DC case, I mean, I think there are a number of motions to bring. First of all, the recusal motion we spoke about, why this judge should be disqualified from hearing this case, primarily because he already made a public statement that President Trump was responsible for the events January 6th and sentencing one of the January 6th defendants in this case. I think that, a hot issue now, first of all, I think that his specific and all of the charges in that case require the specific intent to have done something that the law forbid. I don't believe that at any time on January 6th, the period of time covered by that indictment, President Trump believed that anything he did was against the law. They purposely didn't charge insurrection or sedition in the case because they know the First Amendment elements that would have come up, the defenses that would have come up, but they did this speaking indictment in the case, which is really, to me, what makes the protective order offensive. They go into detail with their unproven, untested allegations. No one got to cross-examine the grand jury witnesses, but they lay all of that out in an indictment that people are to take as the truth now, and then want to prohibit President Trump from speaking about it. So they throw in all of this business. It sounds like insurrection or sedition, but they didn't have the guts to charge it. They shouldn't have charged it, of course, and they didn't charge it. But all of the charges they did charge require specific intent to have done something the law forbid. I think that's a primary defense. I think he's got an immunity defense under this case, Nixon versus Fitzgerald. When the president acts in his capacity, we haven't had a her yet, in his capacity, that then those are the official acts of his office, even if the outer perimeter of that office. I think in this case, again, he acted pursuant to Article 2, Section 1 and 3, take care of the laws faithfully executed. They don't play the parts of the speech in which he demanded that all response be peaceful and that sort of thing. And then I think not finally, there are many issues, but on this scheduling issue that came up yesterday, I think one of the issues the lawyers missed here, but that's a key issue, is you can't possibly, consistent with the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights of the defendant, force this case to go to trial before the Georgia case. Some of the key witnesses, fact witnesses, legal advice witnesses, are defendants in the Georgia case. They can't be compelled to testify. They have a Fifth Amendment right not to testify. They're facing jeopardy themselves. And so you're prohibiting him from his right to compel the attendance of witnesses, effective assistance of counsel, all of those things, by having this case in D.C. go forward before that case. So those are a couple of those issues.
How could they turn that around? Could their lawyers petition that? I mean,
their lawyers should be included in their motion, and they should file another motion now raising those Fifth and Sixth Amendment grounds. They didn't raise the Fifth and Sixth Amendment grounds in the protective order issue either. Those also apply there. They just raised First Amendment grounds. They need to be proactive and creative and raise all of these grounds. You need special lawyers in these kinds of cases. I'll tell you about the New York case, my view in the New York case.
Yeah, I would love to hear it. I want to hear that. I was just going to go to New York, too, before Georgia, because we talked a lot about Georgia. Talk about New York.
Sure. The New York case, to me, it's absurd for a number of reasons, but you know that you don't have to guess. The district attorney's office primarily thinks it's absurd, Alvin Bragg, because you have a book that Mark Pomerantz, who was a special counsel they appointed to investigate it, wrote a book in which he makes clear that the office was against it. The office didn't believe in this prosecution. He did, Pomerantz, for very bad reasons. So anyway, you know, it's skewed from the start. It's an absurd theory in this case, but there are a number of issues. First of all, they filed a motion to recuse that judge, but it wasn't a solid motion. That judge has been appointed now, handpicked for the Trump Organization case, the Bannon case, We Build the Wall, and now this case. He's a Trump hater. He was handpicked for these cases. That shouldn't happen. There's a history in that court, the Supreme Court of New York, for New York County, of, in the past, prosecutors handpicking the judges. This was litigated extensively. The criminal defense bar raised it. The prosecution claimed that they no longer handpick the judges anymore. A federal court at one point said this handpicking of judges at least has the appearance of a lack of impartiality. It shouldn't happen. They didn't raise that historical issue. I think this judge has shown tremendous bias already, but he's a Trump hater. I've been in front of him before. That's my view of him. I think there has to be a motion to disqualify the prosecutor. Alvin Bragg ran on a platform of being the first person in the race who will guarantee that he'll convict President Trump. President Trump wasn't even under investigation. You can't, it's unethical to run on a platform like that. But I think the biggest issue in the case is the indictment's absolutely defective. This is a cockamamie rigging of an indictment in which you have a misdemeanor of reporting mistakes in business records, but it becomes a felony if you did that to commit another crime. They absolutely don't identify what the other crime was to make it a felony. You've got a due process right in order to defend that case. If they're claiming you doctored your business records to commit tax fraud, that's one defense. If it was to commit election fraud, that's another defense completely. So without knowing that, you can't defend the case as a matter of due process. You don't have notice of what the charges are. If you're acquitted, you can't raise a double jeopardy claim, effectively next time around if they try to do it. So those charges are going to have to be thrown out if any court looks at it fairly. And
last but not least, of course, Georgia.
Yeah. Georgia, again, it's got to be removed to federal court. He's got an immunity defense. That's the dismissal matter you described before. I think if you can get it moved out and you get a broader jury pool, you can't find 12 fair-minded jurors in Georgia who are going to conclude that this was a criminal enterprise. I think even if you do, the lawyers should effectively show the phone call in context. And I think underlying all of it is, again, the intent. There was no intent to commit a crime here. There was an intent to demand a full investigation into any possible election irregularities. You know what I liken it to is, it's coming out now. President Trump, you reported on the first impeachment, the Ukraine, demand for an investigation in Ukraine. What he demanded at that time, I wrote an article about it, was an investigation, not prosecution, not the conviction of Joe Biden and his cronies. The investigation. Was there interference in the Ukraine to get the prosecutor fired from his Burisma investigation? And now it's all coming, and he was impeached for demanding the investigation. Now it's all coming out. This week, the investigator himself said that he believed Joe Biden was behind his ousting, and all of this corruption involved is coming out. So you were there first. You reported on it at the time. They didn't want to listen to you.
Well, they didn't want to listen, and they didn't. I mean, they pushed me to a corner. They pushed John Solomon into a corner. They went after anybody who brought any of this up. We are clearly seeing evidence, David, of corruption from this White House like we have never seen. I don't think in modern history, the type of corruption that we're seeing. There was very interesting that you brought up something that is, to me, very striking. And it was all the years, I mean, his entire life, President Biden has been in politics, over 40 years. The documents that they found in his garage in Delaware, in his Corvette and laying around his garage, some of those documents were considered to be classified. I mean, I don't understand how he can get away with it. He did it while he was a senator. There have been obvious connections, very public connections, and I'm not making any accusations beyond the fact that there are direct links between President Biden and the Chinese Communist Party and corporations connected to the Chinese Communist Party and his son and his family. How is it possible that all eyes are always on President Trump when we see all of this overwhelming evidence pointing directly at the Bidens? I mean, openly. They even lied. They even had a letter. Remember the letter signed by all U.S. intelligence officials, 100 and something that were signing it. Even John Brennan signed it. They all knew that they were signing lies, that the laptop that clearly belonged to Hunter Biden, our intelligence community said was Russian disinformation when they knew it wasn't. So what is going on here? Because let me tell you a little secret. There are people with highly classified, right, or formerly had highly classified, access that are wondering the same thing. Like, how does this happen in the United States of America?
Right, because it tarnishes them also. I think the letter you've identified, to me, is one of the most symbolic events that we've seen that I think is evidence of the collapse of institutions that we really held sacred. I think that the average American, like me, believed that our intelligence agencies, we wanted to believe, were above the fray. We're not politicized. To have a group of people, look, you knew about Brennan, Clapper, and all that, but putting them aside, and that's also a disgrace anyway, but putting that aside, the idea that these others would have signed on using the credibility of their offices or former offices, the intelligence community that we cannot have politicized. That letter represents the complete collapse of trust that we can have in those institutions, and the polls all show it. The polls show that we've lost. Listen, my father was an FBI agent. I'm as proud of that as, most anything I have. But people have lost faith in that institution, and so many of the others. That's one of the major fallouts from this. And yet, again, you have to blame the media to some extent for not. They've issued now these mea culpas, Washington Post and all that, but it's a little too late. They lost their way with investigative journalism before, not asking the questions. And unfortunately, we're not seeing it here. There's been no probing, real investigation into this Biden thing. In fact, they attack the whistleblowers when they come forward at great risk to themselves. I don't know. And they paint Jim Jordan and these other ones who want to investigate as bad guys. I don't think they've done their job adequately enough yet, even.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think it is imperative that the U.S. media, the media globally, do its job instead of wanting. And I saw it a lot in Washington, D.C., especially during my time as a journalist working for newspapers there, where people would want desperately to be a part of a White House party, or they would want to go to the Christmas party or be connected to, the Pentagon or the CIA. And instead of becoming the watchdog, they became the lackeys for them and their best friends. And no longer was there a line dividing the two, where you felt like you were getting honest reporting and watchdog journalism. I guess I want to kind of culminate it with this. The Department of Justice, and I'm going to leave this last question up to you to answer as you see fit, because this is, to me, the most important question. Everything stops, in my opinion, with the DOJ. You could say the buck stops with the president, but we've got a new president either 4 years or 8 years. But to me, the buck stops in the United States of America with the Department of Justice. And if the Department of Justice is tainted, if the Department of Justice is no longer blind, if the Department of Justice is owned, much as some of the media has been owned by the political parties, then how do we win?
I would say this. The Department of Justice has done a number of bad things in the past. I have many cases in which they've withheld exculpatory evidence, that kind of thing, on the street level, and some of it approved by higher ups. What I think we've seen here is, to my great disappointment, is a tone deafness at the top and a willingness to go along at the top. I actually thought Merrick Garland was a terrific judge when he was a judge. I had a case before him. I was very impressed with him. I don't know how he has lost his way to the degree he has. I do think one of the major problems in the Department of Justice today is Lisa Monaco, the number 2 person. She's an acolyte for her career of Andrew Weissman and that crowd. And it doesn't get any worse than that. Andrew Weissman's the most ethically bankrupt prosecutor I've ever had the misfortune of having to deal with. But Merrick Garland has become at least tone deaf. This idea of appointing David Weiss now to be special counsel in the Hunter Biden investigation is just a cynical decision. This is a guy who already we know is at odds with the whistleblowers in the case. And giving him the title of special counsel didn't do anything more to advance public confidence in that case. He should have been removed from the case. They want to say, well, he's a Trump appointee. No, he was an Obama holdover. But anyway, that's just one example now. I think that Merrick Garland made a big mistake in authorizing these special counsel investigations. Jack Smith was going to justify his appointment from the start and come up with an indictment no matter what. He's shown horrible judgment in the past in the previous cases that he's brought that have ended either in hung jury or acquittal. It was impressed upon him in those cases not to bring the case, and he did. Yes, I think unfortunately right now we're seeing tremendous public loss of confidence with some justification in the Department of Justice, and that needs to be remedied.
David, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the 14th Amendment, and I want to give you that opportunity to talk about it here before you have to go. So I'm going to leave the platform right up to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's something that troubles me very much. You know, it's become de rigueur in the last couple weeks, at least, to say that no matter what happens in these cases, their fallback position is President Trump should be disqualified from holding office because he supported an insurrection, and therefore under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, he's disqualified. And they're drawing on an article that two scholars wrote sort of to that effect, no matter what. I think it's very, very dangerous. I know that Judge McConnell, who used to be a judge on the 10th Circuit, has spoken out against it, as a number of other scholars have. But I'd put it in a nutshell like this. I believe that even if President Trump were convicted in these cases, they still wouldn't be a bar to him serving as president of the United States again. He was not charged with insurrection or sedition. They could have. There's a federal statute that allows them to charge him with that, and it has as a sentence a bar from holding office. I still think that bar wouldn't be upheld constitutionally as applied to the president of the United States. I believe that as to the president of the United States, the qualifications are limited to what's in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, U.S. born, 14-year resident of the United States, over 35 years of age, and that's it. We cannot impose other qualifications on that. I also think just factually, the argument is offensive because it ignores the result of the duly conducted impeachment trial, the second impeachment trial, which was based on this allegation, which I begged them not to have on jurisdictional grounds, but they wanted to have it anyway, and they lost. So it ignores that result, and it ignores the fact that he wasn't charged in any of these cases with insurrection or sedition. So I think it's offensive. I wish we would get rid of the argument. I think it's got to be dismissed, and ultimately I think it has to be an unsuccessful argument under the Constitution.
Well, I certainly hope President Trump is listening to this podcast with you. I know that he has enormous respect for you, and I know that he takes what you say seriously based on people that I've spoken to. So from your mouth to God's ears, David, I hope and pray that your ability to make these arguments understandable to us laymen, I hope that you will be able to make those same arguments to save our nation and the future of this nation. This isn't just about President Trump. This is about every future president and our political system entirely, and our justice system. And I thank you for being a part of that and being a part of history, because I think people will be reading about you 100 years from now and what happens here on out. So thank you for being a part of the show. You're a great friend and you're a remarkable lawyer.
You're terrific in every way. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, David. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to have you back soon. We need to stand up for our Constitution, folks. We need to stand up for what is right. President Trump, I pray for you every day. I can't even imagine what you and your family have been through. I can't imagine what it must be like to be targeted 24/7 when I know how much you love this nation, when I know how much you care about the American people. It's got to be one of the most difficult challenges any person can face. but you are facing it for all of us. And I thank you for that. And I will continue to pray for you. And I know all of you out there will do the same. Let's pray for President Trump. Let's pray for our nation. Follow me on Truth at Sarah Carter Official, on X at Sarah Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God bless President Trump and his family. And God bless the great state of Texas.